Good evening and welcome to another episode of Prime Focus, the spotlighting program that highlights issues of concern to individuals, families, and communities with a view to bringing better information, awareness, education, and to promoting better action for a better future. Tonight's episode is going to be very exciting. I have an experienced professional in the house, and we will be looking at the issue of child trauma, child abuse and trauma, and its effects on adult life. And if you are not concerned with this issue, then probably haven't looked around the world in which or society in which we live properly. I encourage you to let other people know about it. Share the link with some friends. Call up a few people to join us because it's not just about the childhood aspect. More importantly, it's about its impact on us as adults. And I'm going to introduce our guest tonight, Ibironke um, John, to come and into the studio. But I'm going to start with just a brief introduction of her. Ibironke John is a proud mother of three young adults, each pursuing their God given calls. She is a survivor and thriver of adverse childhood experiences. She is the author of Love Broke the Silence, written in the pseudonym Serena Peters. This is an engaging book that contains a story of overcoming childhood abuse. Ibironke qualified and for several years worked as a social worker and a probation officer, where she worked with clients with complex needs and mental ill health. Ibironke later qualified as an integrated trauma care specialist. She now offers awareness programs and trauma coaching services from both her lived and professional experiences. She is an advocate in raising awareness of child abuse amongst Black and ethnic minorities and is passionate about enabling faith communities to adhere to safeguarding procedures for the vulnerable in their care. Ibironke has been interviewed on Revelation TV and Premier Christian Radio. She loves dogs and creating healthy food menus. Wow, what an awesome profile. Ronke, good evening to you. Thank you for joining Prime Focus tonight.
Good evening, Rexford. Pleased to be
Aw-
here.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. I know we have a lot to talk about, and
Yes.
for the information of our audience, this is going to be a two-part series. I will talk a little bit more about the second part, which comes next week, because this is so loaded. This topic is so loaded. I've already been bombarding her with questions, and I'm sure others who saw the flies are already bombarding you with questions as well. So we're going to get started. But I just thought I would just reading your profile. Something stood out to me there. You love dogs. Okay, tell me about that.
Well, from when I was young, my dad liked dogs, and I think it runs in the family. So I took care of dogs in Nigeria, and I have
Okay.
found dogs very therapeutic. They can be man's best friend, and
Okay.
they're just good animals, and they're just really good companions in that sense. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. I believe you also like nature. Am I right? Because I saw those flowers around you and stuff like that.
Yes. Yes, you're really right because nature to me is something that's beautiful. There's fragrance, there's colors, there's enhancements, and even science has proven, apart from the Bibles, I'm a Christian, that
Hmm.
nature can be very therapeutic to our healing journey and to our awareness for our overall well-being. So yes, I love nature, flowers, trees, fragrances, sea, water.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, let's start getting to this topic here. I mean, we keep hearing childhood abuse, childhood trauma, child traumatic stress, lots of terms being used, thrown all over the place. Could you break this down for us? What exactly childhood trauma and child traumatic stress is all about?
Okay, so there are five categories mainly, or there'll be more, in which some a child can experience trauma. So I'll start from that basis. But generally, what trauma is anything that's happened to an individual, especially complex trauma, in which they had no control but which has had what you call a real long-term difficulty in that person's life, emotionally, mentally, health-wise, even spiritually, relationship-wise, how the education, it affects every aspect of their life. So it's an incident or a number of events, and that can be piled on one upon the other, or a sequence of events, or even sometimes a one-off serious event. And that leads to what we call the person experiences as trauma, because they had no control, no way to kind of navigate around those issues. That's the one issue of trauma. We have something called complex trauma, which we'll deal with a bit later. But childhood trauma is to do with a number of issues. To do with, it could be to do with abuse, and it could be to do with other tragic issues that happen, events that happens in a child's life. For example, the loss of a loved parent, the loss of a grandparent, a significant adult in their life. It could be a fire. So we do know that there are other issues that are not necessarily dealt by the relationships, the abuse from relationship, that can cause trauma in it, that from what we call childhood, that indicates childhood trauma. But I think we are really here talking about childhood trauma due to relationships, due to things that have happened, and that borders on a number of issues. So, for example, where there's neglect,
Hmm.
a mother or father is silent, they don't have any interaction with that child. The child is what we say seen but not heard. And that's an issue that can actually affect that child, because they would want attention. And what can happen in the end, as they get through their adult years, they can develop certain behaviors of protecting themselves, of trying to navigate that pain of rejection. And therefore, they could become what you call a perfectionist. So sometimes you
Hmm.
might have someone that has that as an adult, and they don't know why they're this perfectionist. Now, somebody might see that as a strength, but we know that sometimes a perfectionist can become a bit problematic. So if you imagine two people just newly married, and maybe one of the parties that is a perfectionist can't stand anything, everything has to be absolutely clear, everything has to be spot on. I mean, it becomes overwhelming for the other person.
That's right.
So that's why there's a negative side, although it could possibly be a positive side of getting through. And so you also have childhood issues, abuse that comes from um, verbal abuse, financial abuse, and also sexual abuse and physical abuse. Now, physical abuse is anything that deals with with beating, violence, and it doesn't have to be violence on that child. It could be violence on their parent. So a child witnessing their mother being beaten or sexually abused in the home is going to take that, internalize that as themselves, or it could be their siblings, and it could be other forms of of physical abuse. Undue chastisement. And afflict, slapping, biting, beating, all these things, throwing objects. And then you also have the sexual abuse, which we've talked about, where that child is not protected, where that child is exposed to things that they should never have been, where they should be nurtured and protected, they are not. And that also is to do with, we also take into consideration online abuse, your online sexual abuse as well. So if a child has been asked to look at pornographic images and things, then their mind is very tender. They're forming and shaping the world. So that's abusing that child in that sense. So those are all the spectrums of child abuse. There are others, for example, neglecting to take that child to hospital, refusing to give them medical care, medical attention when they need that, refusing to take them to school when it's within your capabilities. These are all seen as neglect and issues
Mhm.
that contribute to child abuse, which when we now become adults, the adult has to deal with that lack, that form of abuse that they experienced.
Interesting, wide spectrum of things there. There are a couple of things I thought about, situations I've seen with people, but as you said, the focus is obviously on where things have been inflicted on the person, whether it's verbal or physical, sexual, and all that. Okay. How does childhood trauma, if it's not addressed, now begin to take on other proportions? Because every child is a child. So are there some signs or indications that one has to be aware of, early warning signs or stuff like that?
Yes, they are. So now, so child abuse, if we're talking about any form of child abuse, in particular sexual child abuse, and I would say spiritual abuse,
Mm,
um, that can happen, as you know, within the home, but it can happen outside the home many times. You know, it could happen at the childminder, in school, unfortunately, in church, in faith communities, and going to a neighbor doing a sleepover. So these are some of the issues that, you know, the scenes that allow that to take place.
mm,
So what will happen is that when a child, for example, if we want to major on one of the forms of abuse, if we talk about sexual abuse, for example, um, you'll find out that there are so many things that that child might begin to the behavior might change. They might begin to lose weight. And I must say, we have to do a disclaimer here. Some of the things, if I mention some of the symptoms and signs, that's not peculiar only to a child that's been abused. It could be that there's genuinely a medical problem. However, sometimes when a child's been abused, it leads to a medical problem. So we're not saying that every child that experiences any of the things I mentioned is because they've been abused, but it could
right.
be, and it's very common. So
Mm,
yes, we do know that child abuse, when a child's abused, especially sexually and physically, it does lead to medical problems, sleep problems, and you can join the links. If a child is not able to sleep properly, then it's going to affect their education. Then
mhm,
they're going to get irritable. If they get irritable, they might not manage their emotions well. Then there might be anger problems. Or um, if they start to feel really fearful and afraid, they might be having nightmares. And if they have nightmares, they might not want to go to the toilet in the night because they think there's a ghost or the uncle that is there or the witch is
mhm,
there.
mhm,
And therefore, they begin to have bed problems. So you can see how one thing leads to the other. So I'm not saying that sometimes you shouldn't just isolate a problem and work on it, because there could be other issues that the child's going through. It could be they're going through, there's a hormonal issue going on and things like that.
mhm,
But definitely, um, it affects the child's ability to read, to concentrate. They might not like the light on suddenly. Now, I also want to bring onto this forum about if someone has a child who has a learning non-verbal learning, they're non-verbal, let's say autism, because they also, if that child been abused, they will have signs to tell the parent or the caregiver that there are issues. And it could be that they start touching places in their body. They can't be start getting irritated. They can be not wanting to be bathed, not wanting to be washed. Sometimes it's an open manifestation of sexualized behavior, showing an interest. So it's so varied, that children show. It could be actual fear. And sometimes it could be a communication. They try to communicate with the caregiver or with the teacher, let's say, or with the pastor, because here we're not only talking to biological parents. I know that there might be pastors, there might be children's teachers, children's in Sunday school teachers. So there's sometimes it could be even through the eye, the looking at the eye. It could be that they are always looking very anxious. So child abuse in any child does a lot. But some of the things I also want to point out, because we've talked about being a people of faith and of a culture. And we know that people of faith and culture and color, we like praying. So it could be after a spell of, let's say, serious domestic violence, violence, shouting, screaming, threats, things being thrown, and the mother calls that child to come and pray. Classic. That child might not engage in prayer because they are traumatized. If there is a God who is loving and they're witnessing this thing, then why do they want to pray? Sometimes, on the other hand, they may want to pray to say, God, please stop it. But as soon as when it gets to a point that they really are traumatized and it's really affecting them, they might want to dissociate from that, because they begin to feel, oh, if that's who you are, then that's who God is. So there could be some things like that. A child that likes to carry the Bible doesn't want to, because they're associating the parent or the person doing these things to them as God. So these are some of the little ways, and it could be telltale signs of not wanting to go to a place, and that a child, begins. It could be an eating disorder. Again, I'm very careful to say that not all eating disorders is linked to abuse or to trauma, but it could be. And we just have to have an eyes and ears open and be more sensitive. Another clear one, especially when it comes to sexual abuse, is if it's from a particular adult or particular person, not want to be left alone with that adult or that child. Now again, it could be that the person's got green eyes and they've never seen a child adult with green eyes. So, because yes. So I'm not saying that it's always that, but we can't ignore the things that we sense and we pick up, this telltale sign. Um, I know that we're going to be talking about how a child, what can parents, what can caregivers do to protect their children. I know we're going to be dealing with that later, but I just want to use this initial stage to say as well is that we have to be very careful who we allow into our children's lives and who we entrust them into. We have to do checks. You can't just have any childminder or any uncle from or cousin from your hometown coming in and taking care, because many children have been abused by childminders like cousins and nieces that have come in from somewhere, and there's no the protections that should the safeguarding is not put in. So we have to be really aware and have processes. um One of the things I want to say that is to talk about the damage of trauma now, and that's to talk about the brain, because as people of color and of race and culture, we tend to take our brain as not important. But you see, when there's been complex and long-term trauma, the type of things I've explained already, it does damage the brain of a child. And so any adult that has survived and thrived through that might find that later on they're dealing with issues. Why is it they're easily forgetful? Why is it they're not able to sleep? So let's just talk a bit about the brain, because if we were to talk about the kidneys or the legs, their hands, we would think, well, let a doctor help us with that. If someone was finding it difficult to let's say walk, for example, they would actually go to a doctor, get a doctor's appointment. They'll probably go for physio and they would cooperate with that. They'll take an interest to know what is this that the doctor is saying. But we don't always think about the brain, and trauma affects the brain of a child. It affects the formation of the brain. The reason being is that there are about five or six parts of the brain, and when they're what we call key parts of the brain, and they're involved in, I would say, processing potential threats. But when there's been sustained trauma, that is when there's been things that have been happening and that child or that person can't do anything about it, then the brain begins to function in the best way it can to. And some of those things are what we call they they begin to, it can become, for example, a person can become numb to pain. I've seen that happen. But let's talk about what the brain does. So you have a part that stores and retrieves conscious memories and processes. And they also give you stimulus so they can stimulate things. They also have a part that activates and responses and releases what you call hormones to the prime of the body. And you also have the part that acts like a smoke detector. So it helps you with your senses as well, what you smell, what you think, what you perceive as well. But in particular, it helps you with threats. A child that he's potentially being threatened, either for many of the things we've said and anything else, time and time again, it affects that part of the brain, and we'll go back into that a bit later. Then you have a part that does what you call it's called the sensory cortex, and it's the part that actually deals with information and storing information gathered by the five senses. And then you have the part that is called the thalamus. Now the thalamus again is the center part of the brain, okay, and it scans all the incoming information again through the eyes and nose, all our senses, and it tells us where to send it. Now, at this stage, if a child is being violently attacked, maybe abused or sexually abused or ignored, hated, disliked, there's verbal abuse, it begins to affect the way the brain stores information. And that's why sometimes people, when they've become, full forward adults now, they know something has happened, but they don't want to go into it, or they begin to develop certain behaviors and traits. And sometimes for some adults, they have a behavior and they can't understand what it is linked to. Now, I'm not talking as a doctor here or even as a therapist. I'm just talking from my lived experiences, both in probation, both within social work as well, but my own lived experience and people that I've tried to help within my own community and stories I've read as well. And what you find is that with different people, for example, when somebody has what we call OCD, that's a classic one. Sometimes that's caused by, it could be maybe the person's always washing their hands, or they have to have Dettol or bleach around. If someone's been sexually abused as a child over and over again, there's been no outlet. The only way they can feel clean and purified is perhaps dealing with something that takes away that memory because they're trying to self-medicate the symptoms. Or, for example, a child that's, again, I would say that's been verbally abused, maybe one of the parents comes into their room at 12 o'clock for no reason, starts beating them over the head, it's going to affect their sleep. So when they become an adult, they might always be having a serious sleep problem. They might go to the doctor, and if they don't disclose this part, the doctor will probably be treating the symptoms of the headache or the ability to sleep, give them sleeping pills, or it might suggest some mindfulness as well. But really and truly, that adult at some point in time needs to go back to the drawing board. How did I get here? What has happened? And so that brings me into a conversation. We talk about ACEs. And ACEs is a score. And I think Rex, I shared with you about a famous person called Oprah Winfrey who shared a part of ACEs, and she was saying something in the line of, when she's had the people that she works with, especially young people in Africa, she's learned to say, not why are you behaving like this, but what has happened to you. Now, I think that's a central question that we have to ask ourselves with the young people, with ourselves, anybody that's in our lives that is showing some kind of problems or serious issues. What has happened? What happened to you? And we're not asking that from a point of view of condemning the person. We're asking that, let's explore, let's talk. I'm here to listen. Is there a journey you want to go through? Anything you want to explore? And so that is part of what we would call that could be part of the road of recovery, a journey of recovery. So I know I've jumped from A to Z, but I just want to get our minds on childhood abuse and how it does lead and how it affects the adult in the long term. So I'm just trying to get us prepared to know that this conversation is for anyone who's tuned in.
Interesting. You've touched on a big area there, the effects of the trauma, and of course that's the core of what we are discussing today. But just for the benefit of maybe people maybe who have younger children who are thinking a preventative mode, what would you say could be a couple of things they could do, right now, so that they don't get to a point where they have the kind of conversation we're having today?
Okay. Having seen it and having known that there are many undisclosed cases, I'm going to answer it from both, but when it has and to prevent. I do like the prevention, but I know that there are so many that they're closed
Right.
cases, undisclosed. So, but to prevent, it's becoming what I would call becoming aware, being educated. So those of us that are from a faith community, go to church or to the mosque or a praying place, who do you leave your child to? Do you know them? Have they had what you call DBS? Could they be potentially a risk to your child? Are they mentally stable? When I say mentally stable, it doesn't mean that someone who's depressed can't take care of your child or a parent can't. Of course, the person can. But are they stable enough that if you leave them alone with that child, they won't harm that child? Because that's a way of preventing, knowing more, probably more, being curious. Now, sometimes I think from people from Africa and from the Africa and Asian continent, we tend to think to be curious with someone that's older as a relative is wrong. is frowned upon. But we do need to be curious. Oh, tell me how do you do with this? You know, don't just entrust your child to anyone. Listen to the child is important. Have times in which you can almost put it like an appointment if you want to speak with your child. There's no point if a child comes from school and you are washing plates, you're already annoyed, tired, and worn out. And so I says, Mom or Dad, I really want to talk about something. There's something that somebody said that I'm not really sure. There's no point just shoving that child away. Say, just, try. If you know you're too tired, just say, you know what, I want to finish this thing right now. I'm doing it, so it's important. I'm going to come to you maybe 15 minutes and talk with about it. On the other hand, you know your child. If you know that a serious conversation like that will make the child shut up, withdraw, then find a way of saying, oh, so what happened? Then drop what you're doing then. You've got to choose. But what I'm saying is that listen to your child, enhance your communication skills with that child. And if it's not your direct child, you're in a place of authority, like a Sunday school teacher, still take it seriously. Don't shove it off. Don't try to ignore. And don't think a child is ever exaggerating. Believe the child. Today I showed you it's something that my own sister sent to me. She said, I believe you 100%. Because every child, before they come and disclose something, it's not easy. Sometimes they are going against the grind to speak, to communicate. So believe, and watch out for the signs as well. Is your child suddenly withdrawing? And I'm not talking about when they're going through the teenage stage. Could they suddenly be withdrawing? Are they not eating? Are they making comments and things that you think this is really, really unlike them? You understand? Are they taking substances? Because that's some of the reasons why some young people they take substances. So we need to know, we need to be more aware of what's going on, and to ask and to be curious and to use that information in a sensitive way and believe that child. Have a trusting. And also, if any child says anything to you that shows some kind of concern or fear, build up that trust with that child, but also let them know, always reaffirm them that they shouldn't feel bad or feel guilty about what they're saying, about what's on their mind, about their thoughts. If we shut a child down, they will shut down. If you tell them to go away and keep quiet, or go do their homework instead, or you think you just don't want to do your homework, you don't want to go to bed, that's why. If you think things like that, then you're shutting that child down. So we're living in an age when there's so many things happening. And the biggest one is also online and through phones. And we know that's happening. How children are being groomed through phones. And it could be their friends. So also have times with your child. Maybe to, I don't know, Costa Coffee, Starbucks, because sometimes they don't want to be groomed, but someone on their phone, it could be their other friend at school that is doing that accent and say, oh, come and look at my phone, come and look at my pictures. So we need to have these conversations with our children.
Right. Wow. Thank you. So much information in there. I know some people would say, okay, I mean, you keep talking about your professional lived experience. Is there something about your lived experience that makes you so passionate about? Because I've known you for a couple of years now, and I know
Yeah.
how you're passionate about what you do. Is there a story behind what you do?
Very much. So I've got a book called Love Broke the Silence, and I wrote it in 2019, and it's my own personal story of surviving and coming out and overcoming, I'm going to say, because I know the word surviving, but I believe that you're not just in survival mode. I know the word, but I'm talking about that you don't just survive, you live that full life. And so I came out of all that, and it's some child abuse that happened for about 14 and a half, 15 years from the age of 6.5. We're not going into all the details now because that's not necessary, but just suffice to say that the perpetrator in my case was my father. And it took me to disclose to somebody who kind of picked up there was something wrong. I think the part that I want to bring up from my story was that there was a lot of fear. And there might be people here too who belong to the church and things like that. So with me, because there was so much authority from my father, it was really, I felt I was in a trap, if I'm to say, but also I was in a trap because there were also spiritual things he was doing. Now, I know that sometimes professionals don't always want to accept that, but it is there. So he was doing certain prayers, doing certain things, and I really felt really like I was in a cave, like in a bondage, and that is why some people find it difficult to disclose, because emotionally, mentally, they feel as if they're in this trap and they can't get out, or they feel if I disclose, this person said this bad things are going to happen, these evil things are going to happen. But also, we do know that sometimes there are people using charms and supernatural things. And as much as some people might be skeptical about that, well, you only have to go and ask witches. you know, if it's not true, go and ask the witches, and they're not only black witches. Ask them. So let's face it, there are people using ways of controlling a person. And so for me personally, it took a struggle, because I realized that the way he was going about things, I wouldn't survive if I didn't get help and rescue. So the consequence of that, after that all ended, I thought, well, everything's been disclosed, I've got help, he can't do anything to me now. But it's then that the healing began, then the realization. And that's what we talk about childhood trauma and growth from childhood trauma. And what are the symptoms? What are some of the recovery? What are some of the effects of this on an adult? What are the things you see in yourself? Well, one of the things for me was definitely sleep. So my sleep was erratic, to be honest with you. In fact, I had a problem with sleep. I didn't like sleep. I saw sleep literally as an enemy. Now, how can you go
Mm.
through life seeing sleep as an enemy? Yeah, like a little baby. You know, a baby, when you bounce your baby up and down, they don't want to sleep and then they start crying, but they're really tired, but they start bouncing up and down and you have to stroke them. And I'm a person of faith, and I will just tell you that God healed me. And is my sleep much better today? Yes, it is, but it's taken a long time
Mm.
for me to go into what you call, my son says something about the REM of sleep, the deep sleep, because I'll be someone that if you just turn on the light, my eyes are wide open. I wasn't deeply sleeping. And that was just due to the childhood trauma. So these are some of the effects. Another thing is that for some people, they have an eating problem. They either overeat, comfort eat a lot, and it is linked sometimes to trauma, childhood trauma, or they don't want to eat. They develop weight. Another one is hating the body, especially when it comes to sexual abuse, is hating the body, dishonoring the body, and being very open and vulnerable. Especially when someone has known what we call sexual abuse, that is one of the things that hits very hard, their vulnerability. So either they can become really loose and you get easily what you call teenage pregnancies, or they can become very promiscuous. Now, again, I'm aware that we're living in a society where what is promiscuity? What is it? Yes, it is wrong. So these are some of the channels. And for some, it's addictions. And the classic addictions that we know is drugs, alcohol, and for some people, it's pornographic things, and they're trying to find love and acceptance and fulfillment in other things. Some is finance, it's money. Can I just say, one person that I worked with when I was working probation, a woman brought up really, in a traditional way, brought up to respect, brought up to know not to steal, not to do anything wrong. And I remember I was a probation officer. Why? Because she stole. She was prosecuted and she was given a probation sentence, and I became that probation officer. This woman, well spoken, she said to me, I've never done these things as a child. I've always been brought up in a strict way, but they were over strict. There was no love, no affirmation. So she said, my problem is not that I need the things I take, but something in me needs to take something to get attention.
Mm.
So there is a word for it. I think it's called kleptomania. It's a
That's right.
phobia.
Yeah. Mhm.
Because she can't but go into a shop and take. Not that she needs those items. It's like she's lacked love. an affirmation. So she takes those things and doesn't need them.
Mm.
So you can see how things affect a person. It could be not managing anger.
Mm-hmm.
It could be being dissociated from loving your own child. If you've not loved it, been known love sometimes from your parents, from your nurturers, sometimes, especially there's a lot of rejection and abandonment that goes in. Some children, just some parents don't are not attached to their child. They just don't know what it is. And it's not because it reminded them of their grandmother or something. They just don't have that connection. They're fighting for the connection.
Mm.
And so it leads to low self-esteem sometimes. Trying to please and appease. Fear, living with fear and anxiety. And we know that when an adult has these things, it begins to affect their health. So complex trauma is linked to health problems now. It's
Mm.
linked to even being able to give birth in the sense of peace and joy. It's linked to obesity. It's linked to diabetes. It's linked to mental ill health, which we are all aware. It's linked to people having post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, triggers. It's linked to schizophrenia. Schizophrenia could be things, psychosis, when people are hearing voices, they're seeing things, images, because of the distress that the body has gone through and the mind has
Mm.
gone through. The mind is trying to regulate itself, but there is no regulation. The regulations there are things that people are trying to work through. I want to say that being someone that has survived and thrived from 15 years of um, abuse from my father, I had some weird ways myself. You understand? I wasn't addicted to alcohol. I would say God helped me, but I was addicted to just, I had these things that was just some funny weird thing. I would have a pillow, I'd be kissing the pillow, I'd want comfort from things like that. It's so people have their ways of trying to adapt. And I recognize that when I had my two sons, sometimes I was a bit uneasy. I had to say, God, what is it what's going on with me? And so what I'm trying to say is that trauma and complex trauma are not your friend.
Mm.
If you think, well, I can get on, I've got by with it. I'm not condemning anybody. This is not that. But I'm just trying to tell you, do you want to live to a more fulfilled life? Do you want
Mm.
to do more with your life, with all that you have, with all the expression you have?
Mm.
And it just reminds me of a film I watched. I watched it a few years ago. A bit different scenario. But there was this man, when he was a child, his father died in the water. I think the boat capsized, and he was trying to get rescue the dad. He couldn't, and he kept saying, "Dad, dad, dad, dad." The dad died. The dad tried to swim back, but the boat capsized. But he survived. When he grew into his adult years, he found himself taking care of young children. He married, you know, found himself taking care of young children, and there was a contest that if he won, if his team, his children won, then they would have enough money to be able to purchase, I think, another building that they badly needed. It was something, a service that they needed. But in part of that competition was for him to go into saying go, I think, go fishing. So the other parts of that contest he was fine, but when it came to that part, he was sweating. He had heart palpitation. He was having nightmares. And one of the children that he was taking, it was a teenager that he was taking care of, said to him, "But you've been telling us to be strong. You've been telling us to do this. For our sake, can't you just go and do this?" And he couldn't. The reason being because he was traumatized by seeing his father and had not got over that issue of that imagery of seeing his father. So he lost something within him
Mm.
in seeing that. So that's why I want to say to you that trauma is not a friend to anyone, but it doesn't mean that we are condemned, because sometimes we are trying to cope. And to just also let us know is that sometimes when the adult copes by trying to nurture other people, and that is good, because that could be something that God's leading you and it gives you fulfillment, but not at the expense of your own health and your own social
Mm.
well-being. Because it could be that the busyness and caring for others, you're not looking at what your own needs, but you're giving attention to somebody else, and it's a way of hiding and holding back the
Mm.
things you have gone through.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been a load of great information. Here, I just wanted to mention to our audience that your book, for those who want to read maybe a bit more, Love Broke the Silence, you can get it on Amazon. But I believe you have something also for the audience when we come to this. The next part on the kind of support we can talk about that. But very quickly, I think I mentioned to you in my reading, I came across what this transgenerational trauma thing. What exactly is it? I mean, maybe in a brief sentence or two, maybe you could explain that, because I hear people talk about it, particularly in certain communities. Yes.
Yeah, so trauma, there's different categories. You have different categories of trauma.
Mm,
And when it comes to transition, it's something that somebody can pick up because of what has happened in terms of your ancestors or in terms of a community. So we know that, for example, the George Floyd case, for example, there were a lot of riots, and even though some people say they went out of hand, but it rose something in other people. One, because you could identify genetically. For Black people, they could identify, um, they could feel what their forefathers or other people had experienced. I remember a manager that I worked with recently. She was telling me that when she heard about the George Floyd's case, she felt as if as someone was rumbling. It affected her almost physically. And that's when her daughter said, Mom, you're picking up what is going on. These things are real. For example, another one is, where you have whether with the black boys, should I say, with police and the issues that have gone on and feeling that they've been scapegoats and things like that. It's because they pick up the trauma because, for example, you can imagine when there's what you call microaggression. A young black person a black male goes into a shop. Let's say it's a middle class, really expensive shop, and you have the security guard looking around them. It's so that you can pick up the trauma of somebody else, and it can ignite anger, it can ignite anxiety, it can ignite distrust, it can ignite all sorts of things. Not being able to not to feeling that well, I rebellion and anti-authority. And that's the other side of trauma, because for some young people, they can truant from school, they can become anti-authoritative to anyone that's been in their life. So that's what happened. There's also another type of trauma people experience if they're from a caring profession, where they've stared too long or so long in trying to help. Those that are like fire brigade work, they might experience social workers, doctors, nurses, maybe teachers, police officers, definitely, and those in the army, because they've worked with people, they've seen the suffering and the agony, and sometimes there's a sense of guilt that they couldn't do anything about it. So they also can experience that, and because if they don't get help, they can experience burnout. I know for myself, that's what happened to me. Working as a probation officer with people with complex needs, I would extend myself to the point that I wasn't protecting my soul, my mind anymore. And sometimes, um, if I think, for example, was working with a person with complex needs issues, perhaps substance misuse, homelessness, danger, they were vulnerable at the same time, causing problems for other people. I would try and work around so many things and sometimes be manipulated by them, thinking that I am the one to rescue.
mm,
No, if you've experienced trauma, one of the symptoms that might linger on is the feel you need to rescue people, the sense of guilt that you're the answer. No, you're not. You have to have borders and boundaries.
mm,
And so this is the different types of trauma that can happen. It could be someone that's traumatized because they've seen an accident and they've been involved and they had the memory. I know this happened to me in December, just this December. Somebody came on a road going my way in a car, about two cars in front. So it was on a dual carriageway. A car kept on going in and out, in and out. So I thought, in my mind, I thought it's one of these young people, probably on some drugs. If he wants to overtake whatever is in front of me, let him overtake. That's what I was thinking. I was doing the mileage. And suddenly the car came out this time. But instead of going back in, the car continued to go out, out, out until eventually he did like a 90 degrees turn and deliberately crashed into a trailer. So it's like a 90 degrees turn, yeah, because he turned and came out and went that way. And I happened to be one of the witnesses because I saw it. The man wasn't young, he was actually older. We don't know what the reasons were. But, on the scene, then I had to pray. I prayed that I was one of the people that had to stop my car. Well, there were not many of us. Eventually, I'm the one that had to ring the police. Ring the ambulance, 999. They were asking me questions. Is he breathing? And somebody else had to be holding him. There was blood coming out all over. You can imagine the mess. And no, he wasn't. He was struggling to breathe. He was going purple. He was going, and then somebody else stopped their car, a private ambulance. She said, "Oh, he's going." And she turned away. That we should all look away. That he's going to go anytime from now. But something in me, so I said, "No, let's pray. I'm going to pray for him." Well, eventually the ambulance did come and they tried to work on him, and I gave my statement to the police. But what I'm trying to say is that as much as I came around thinking, "Oh, I prayed, he didn't die, at least not that I didn't see him die. I don't believe he died," because it was later on it started coming to me. And anytime I see a car doing a 90 degrees trying to come out, I'm thinking, not another one. Do you see how trauma works now? It works on the brain. But we didn't have to give ourselves some gaps, some healing, and give it some context. And that's the meaning of trauma. When there's no context, when there's no progress, our mind begins to develop and put it in another way, but it's stored there. And so now I have to say to myself, no, just because a car is zigzagging does not mean I'm going to see the same thing that happened that day that caused a lot of shock and trauma.
Awesome. Let's just take a quick break, and then when we come back, we want to look at support for those affected. And then you can also talk about your free gift as well that you're making available to people. So let's just take a minute off. Focus is a twice monthly live streaming program on YouTube, which highlights issues of concern to individuals, families, and relevant communities, bringing greater awareness and education, with a view to improving the lot of many through anticipated positive actions. Join in our conversations and subscribe to the channel too. Right. Ronke, thank you so much for all the insights that you have given to us. Let's come to the aspect of support for those who have been affected. Obviously, for all the wonderful things you've said, many of us would not, in terms of viewership, would not be able to go back to our past. But you did say something earlier when you were citing the story about Oprah Winfrey, and I actually watched that particular clip, was very insightful indeed, that we can go and find out what happened. In other words, instead of dealing with the tip of the iceberg, we can help ourselves by digging into the past and finding out things that could be repaired. I know you talk from a faith perspective, and sometimes they will say, okay, whatever was generational, but sometimes there are practical things that, or remembrances that we need to have. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah. Yes, you are. You're right. You're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So, in terms of support, what do you suggest? I can put up your stuff now if you want me to, in terms of what you're offering to people as well. For those who would be interested. Now, this is something that Ronke, maybe you can take a minute to talk about this.
Okay, so this is a 21-day journal, and I've said it's for hope and discovery about you. The reason why I did that, because I feel that sometimes when people have experienced trauma, things seem confusing. The mind can be a bit confusing, and we are all on this road and journey of recovering from something, getting, having, we want a better quality of life for ourselves, the loved ones in our lives. We want to make an impact. So the clear blue sky is really, the sky is blue. Look at the sky, it's blue normally, although it can be cloudy. It's about clarity. And I say it's for the radiant woman, but can I say it's also for the awesome man? I don't know if a man wants to be called radiant, but awesome man. Yeah, because we do believe that the manhood, there's been a fight for the identity of men, and for them to find their identity, especially where there has been abuse in their life. So it can be used for that, or you can give it to your partner. It is free. It's 21 days, and it has pictures and images in which you can just look at it and look at the image, get some inspiration for the day, and look at the things, the content that is mentioned, that was written there, and hopefully do some journaling for yourself. And that 21 days, it's a great time to break any habit. It's a great time to take a new step and a new leap of faith. And this, if you don't mind, I would like to say,
Before you go on there, I just thought I'd comment on it because when you send a link, I flipped through a little bit. I said, "Oh, this looks very exciting," and that's why I asked you, "Is this just for women or it's also for men?"
yeah,
Because it's really for those who are viewing the live stream or those who watch the video afterwards. The link is in the description. You would find it at Ronke's free gift to you, and you can click on it and you can start using. I even like the way it's done, well, the way the leaves turn over nicely, so
yeah,
thank you so much for that resource. Yes.
thank you. Can I just say, I just want to flip over some of the things with some of the content very quickly to go back on some of the consequences of trauma. I know we'll go into them for the next session, but I thought I'd actually go through some things I've actually have written out, because I just want everyone to feel included here and not to feel, well, that doesn't concern me. So the consequences of trauma are physical, emotional, behavioral, interpersonal, and cognitive. And some of those things are, for example, mood swings. Under the emotional side, you have mood swings, hopelessness, anger, rage, aggression, shame. Shame was a big one I felt. It was like a weight on me. And lots of people do feel ashamed. That's it. They carry that shame in different ways. Guilt, numbness. Numbness is a big one that I want to mention. And I mentioned it in context about praying. That you can't ask your child, if you've just received some beating, and ask your dad to come and let's pray, and think that child's going to take the breath. The child's dealing with things. And if we force that child not to understand the emotions, the fear, then they can become numb to things. But can be a reaction even as for an adult. Another one is fragmented, detached feelings, putting things into compartments, and that can be good, but it can be negative. Fear, sadness, hypersensitivity, and that's bordering on relationships. Oh, you said this, or you meant this, oh, you didn't say that, so I thought you didn't like me. Anything to with trauma, we need to just deal with it and get over and work through this journey. Anxiety, preoccupation with danger, and that's now bordering on mental ill health. Some people are preoccupied with danger. Difficulties in emotional regulation, and social workers know that as well. When you see a 5-year-old child that can make friends with everyone, anybody, it's not always that God has blessed them with a personality like that. Sometimes they're not attached to those that should nurture them because they've been neglected. Difficulties, okay, powerlessness, that's common. Depression and fear of dependency. Under the physical, I want to just narrate some of the things that I've written down here that I have on my paper here. Sleep disturbance, eating difficulties, gastrointestinal problems, migraines. I had that. You can imagine not sleeping properly, migraines, migraines, dealing with pain, emotional pain, impaired immune system, very, very serious. Somatic symptom disorder, sexual and reproductive health risk. Obviously, with that comes HIV and STIs as well. Pregnancy, multiple terminations, physical injuries from repeated assaults. We do know of so many stories. Poor physical health, asthma, chronic fatigue, chronic pelvic pain, due to disconnection, high tolerance for pain. I don't know whether I had that or not, but I do know that that's time I used to prime myself that I could take a lot of things. And because I would push through, and you find this with some black young men as well, and white young men as well. They go to the gym. They almost make it. Some people say, "Oh, you're making it like an idol." It's not like that. Sometimes they've been painful things, and so they are going against. They think that they're building resilience, but they're doing it to the detriment of their body. They don't even know when the body has reached the maximum level of pain, and they need to kind of cool down. So these are some of the symptoms. Physical injuries, obviously, of if there's been sexual abuse, we know that um, it can lead to physical injuries of of the sexual organs. We do know that there's some people admitted to hospitals. Behavior, self-harming behavior, which you mentioned, because not hating the body, suicidal, alcohol and drug use, risky sexual compromise behavior, irritability, eating disturbances, impulsive and aggressive behavior, loss of interest in activities, hypersensitivity to the environment, impatience, rejection, hostility. Now, under interpersonal, this is where it begins to affect the person in their profession. Maybe we'll work with people with these symptoms. They can be withdrawn, very closed up, very cold, difficulties with trust, angry outbursts, expecting to be rejected. That's a common one.
Mhm.
Problems in relation to others, difficulties with power and control and coercion. Either trying to control somebody else, control your family, control them at work, or you are easily controlled. Issues with intimacy, impaired mentalization, withdrawal from community, lack of spiritual connection. Now, where there's cognitive problems, there could be dissociation spectrum, low self esteem, self blame, apathy, fragmented memories, problems with recalling of events and information, self doubt, flashbacks, nightmares. I want to just talk about nightmares and panic attacks. I had that and phobias. I experienced all that because I said to you 15 and a half years. So I started after, and I don't know, after even after the time I'd had got married, had my children, sometimes I would have a dream, and in the dream, this happened many, many times. I would see my mother coming into the dream, and she would either take me into a car, and the car would be near a cliff. Then she would come out of the car and leave me on the end of the car, balancing on the cliff. And in the dream, she would walk silently away, a bit not happy. Not She wouldn't walk away and say, "See ya, serves you right." It was not like that. She would look withdrawn and miserable. I must be honest, in the dream. But in my mind, I'll be trying to say, "Mom, don't leave me. Where are you going? Why are you going?" Silently, I had silent questions that were not even strong enough to verbalize. They would never verbalize them in the dream. In the dream, they'd only stay inside me as well. And then I'd wake up. I had these perpetually for a long time. And so I went to meet what I would call was a what we call in the Christian field, in the African field, a deliverance minister. Told her my past, and she said, "There's sin in your life," basically.
Hmm.
That was not the answer. That was not the solution. We'll talk about that next week because that only did more damage to me. My soul was needing healing, not to be told it's because you've got something, you're a sinner and things like that. So those are things that people can have panic attacks, suddenly have that. Phobias, obsessive compulsive thoughts. That is very, very true. For Christians who believe in binding the enemy and can bind from morning to night, if you don't deal with, sometimes you don't get healing for the trauma, those thoughts just come out. You think, that is it me? Is it not me? No, it's not you. That is not you. Believe it or not. Thoughts of harm to self and others. That's serious when that happens. Loss of meaning, disorientation, minimization, denial, problems with planning process and making decisions and action. I would say sometimes not even being dependable or sometimes exaggerating it. I know for me, I was always trying to buy favor and love and acceptance. So sometimes people who've experienced trauma of any type, they try to buy affection And it could be by giving money. It could be being very vulnerable. It could be bad money decisions as well, because you're trying to get over things you didn't have. Or it could be you feel if I don't give this money, they're not going to love me. They're going to accept me. So it could be you're easily manipulated, or you're manipulating somebody else to buy their love. So these are some of the effects.
Mm. Wow. This is awesome. I'm just so engrossed listening to you. I can see we've sort of run out of time here, but there's just so much to say. But the good news for our audience and those who will be watching this video later is that Ibironke is going to be back with us next week. So the next episode, she is going to be back here, and it's going to be explosive. Come with your questions, because she's going to be looking at post-traumatic growth or post-trauma growth and the role of safeguarding, or the role of, put it the other way around, the role of faith communities and social services in safeguarding children. So that whole issue there's a big this conversation that's going to be had next week. Please make sure you're here. Those of you who've had questions about many things about with certain agencies and all that, this is the time to be here. Please make sure you join us as well. Thank you. Ronke, any closing thoughts?
Yes, I'm gonna give you some place that if anything we've said has triggered you, this is not an easy topic. You might know somebody, you might feel a bit afraid. So I'm gonna give you some names you can contact, and some agencies and organizations. And I just want to let you know that this is a comment from one or two people, that trauma confronts human beings with the extremities of helplessness and terror, and evoke the responses of catastrophe. What I'm trying to say is that trauma does do a lot. And if you've been triggered, or you feel helpless, you feel, well, I've hidden all this, or I've not done anything about it. For someone that's to do with, if it's to do with a child or a young adult, you have the NNPC,
Hmm.
you have your local authority. No matter where you live, there's social services. You can report an abuse. And I hope we've tried to explain some of the abuses. It's not just sexual. If a child is being neglected, if a child's not being allowed to go to the hospital, you know, if a child's been physically abused, if a child is being neglected, please take it seriously. If a child is disclosing that someone's doing things to them against their will, then we need to take it seriously. And if you see and you know, you know you're able to talk, then take it seriously as well. If you have a safeguarding lead in your church or in your place of faith, do the right thing. If it's in school, you need to need to report it. So you do have, for children, there's the helpline, there's the child helpline, but you also have the parent helpline as well. So you have a lot of organizations that will help. And if you've also been a victim of domestic violence, you have the National Women's Aid. You can contact them, you can go online. You can also reach out to me. If I can't help you, at least I can be a resource and a referral point for you. And I'm ready to do that. So feel free, and you also have Rexwood if you want to reach out to him. And I will be on next week. And just let you know that for me, at 15 and a half years, I'm sound. My mind's been healed. There may be still some healing. I'm not denying that. I want to give you hope. Don't go away and feel, well, that's it, and feel condemned. It's not your fault. However, if you know you've caused some of these things to young people, adults, there's still hope for you. In a sense, there's help for you. Get the help. Social services are not against families anymore in that sense. They're working for families because they know that, a community or a society thrives well when the families are doing well. So sometimes you can reach out for help. There are all sorts of organizations you can reach out for help. So if you've been someone that has also caused harm to others, don't just ignore it and withdraw and think, well, that's just it, there's nothing I can do. No, you can get help and make life better for yourself and for others in your life. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Ibironke. This has been just exciting, detailed, insightful, loads of knowledge coming across today, and it just keeps getting better. Wow, our audience, thank you so much. Let me just take a look in the chat if there's been any Okay, awesome session. I can't wait for next week. Judy, thank you so much. Right, let's spread the word. Let's keep sharing the link. Share it, share it,
Yeah.
share it. Let people get the healing, get the enlightenment, get the direction, get the hope that they have been looking for. Ibironke, it's been a pleasure having you on with us tonight. Thank you so much for your time. To our
Thank you.
audience and to those who will watch this, we hope that you've benefited a lot from this session tonight and look forward to seeing you in the next episode where Ibironke is going to be back again with us, as I said, post-traumatic growth and the role of churches or faith communities and social services in safeguarding children. Thank you all very much as we bring tonight's session to a close.
Thank you.